Hey there. I got this cool book. It's very rare. It's the history of Jews in Frankfurt. This is the Jewish Community Series. A Jew is someone who is born again by the Spirit of God, who turns away from sinning. Right? So instead of indulging in their pleasure and doing anything at another person's expense, always denying themselves for other people, to uplift them. That makes you a Jew if you do that. Nowadays we have a new word for it. We call it Christian. And it can be confusing because people who call themselves Christians don't do that. And neither do people who call themselves Jews. Point being, a bunch of liars and hypocrites. All of them. They're useless terms. They're, words. These words have been emptied completely. So anyway, this is the history of Jews in Frankfurt. And I thought it would be a good book because, first of all, it's from 1929. That's before the Big Bad War, the second one. What was this, maybe 4 years before Hitler became the chancellor? Now here's the thing about Frankfurt, Germany. After World War I, power had entered the hands of German Jews and, Catholic centrists. It was especially heavy on the so-called Jews. They loved prostitution and drugs, and they just created a really nasty, degenerate society, and much like America today. And it was just the German people were being ravaged by sin. Everything was legal. Bunch of libertarians, you'd say. But, the truth is, the people behind it called themselves Jews, and so the Germans called them Jews as well. Because nobody's actually reading the Bible. Nobody knows what it says. Now, whenever Adolf Hitler came to power, there were some Jewish intellectuals in Frankfurt, Germany, who we collectively refer to as the Frankfurt School, referring to the school of thought, which is Marxism, essentially. Hitler came to put an end to Marxism in Germany, which was called the Weimar Republic. They took Germany away. You can't be Germany no more. You're the Weimar Republic. Well, it was all Marxism. It was all degenerate nonsense. It was all death. Death and death and death and no thought, no mind, no understanding, just pleasure and pleasure and pleasure. Oh, pleasure kills you. Anyway, so Hitler came and said, you cut that out now, you so-called Jews. Except he called them Jews. He said, you stop it. I'm putting an end to it. And then they just had folks like Herbert Marcuse and Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer. These gentlemen, they had to go. They had to get out because they were the communists. The communists who the Nazis asserted they would stop. They were the ones poisoning the minds of the German youth and had indoctrinated a whole generation and created these laws that made Germany a cesspool. Like a literal set thing. They were like, think about California today. And think about, if there was a guy from Nevada, but he moved to California and he loved it there, but he couldn't stand all the drugs and the prostitution, and it seemed that the government was out to get the people of California, and he said, damn it, not anymore, and he ran for governor. And I mean, the Weimar Republic was like California, maybe worse. Probably not. Anyway, these so-called Jewish intellectuals, they had to leave Germany. They first went to Great Britain, not for long, just stopped in to say hi to their cousins. And then they came to America. And they established the free love movement. They started indoctrinating young people to think in terms of oppressor and oppressed. And Herbert Marcuse, in his book Eros and Civilization, I'm laughing thinking about how he spoke. It's this thick. And it all boils down to, if you want to be free, you gotta abolish civilization. Civilization necessitates adherence to authority. An authority which is necessary in order to keep the order which is required to build a civilization. And that's all slavery. Can you believe it? We're all slaves because we live in a civilization. And so we have to abolish the civilization. And so how are we going to do that? Criticize everything all the time. And don't stop. And, even though you're wrong, and even though someone makes a really great point, sticks it to you, well, you're still right. Don't you forget that. And anyway, that's called critical theory. And it came out of Frankfurt, Germany. From the Jewish community of Frankfurt came critical theory, which plagues the world today. So let's check out this book from 1929, The Jewish Community Series, Frankfurt, by A. Freeman and F. Crocker, I'll say. Kracauer. Who cares? Translated from the German manuscript by so-and-so. Bertha's Old Leaven. Philadelphia, the Jewish Publication Society of America. They got some good ones. I have multiple of their books. 1929. Now let's just start. Let's do 15 pages to start. Earliest times to the Second Massacre. Chapter 1. Earliest times to the Second Massacre. As early as the period of the destruction of the temple in the Holy Land, it may be assumed individual Jews, and remember, when they say Jews, they're not talking about Jews. They're talking about who Jesus calls fake Jews in the synagogue of Satan. Those who say they are Jews but are not. They're not Jews, because we know that a Jew is somebody who is in the body of Jesus Christ, someone whose body belongs to God and who doesn't indulge in sin and deception. These people are liars and hypocrites. You know, rabbi means master, but if you're a Jew, then you have only one master, right? Our Father in heaven. So anyway, this isn't about real Jews. This is about a people whose identity is a lie. And everybody in the world has wholesale just bought the lie that they're Jews just because they keep up these traditions. But that's why Jesus came and said tradition is meaningless. Tradition may be used to deceive you. All you need to do is deny yourself and repent for your sins, and then God will come into you and you will become a god, Jesus said. Have you read the book? All right, read it, because he says that we are gods. He says that in reference to where it says the same thing in the Old Testament. Oh, but God was speaking to the Jews. Well, we're all Jews, but we're going to get to that at another time. I guess we've already gotten to it. Okay, look, you're a Jew if you're circumcised in the heart and you turn away from your body, and all you have left is love. As early as the period of the destruction of the temple in the Holy Land, it may be assumed individual Jews in the wake of the Roman armies had found their way to Germany. Certainly in the days of the Roman Jews had reached the lands along the Rhine and inhabited Cologne, Mainz, Speyer, Worms, and Trevens. For this reason, it seems at first glance surprising that Frankfurt, a town of some note under the Carolingians, harbored no Jewish community until well into the 12th century. Okay, so the Jews enter Frankfurt in the 12th century. Take notes, because you're going to want to do further research, okay? So what happened in the 12th century? Why did the Jews come? I don't know. Although it was the capital of the East Frankish Empire as early as 876, it lay apart from the world trade routes of the time, agriculture and stock farming being its only important industries. It was a niche. It had an opportunity. We're going to set up a market that no one's ever traded in before. Let's see. I need to stop my comment. Less commentary. I'm getting lost. Therefore, there was nothing to induce the Jews who, under the Saxon and Franconian rulers, were the chief wholesale traders of the time, to settle in Frankfurt permanently. What were they? They were the chief wholesale traders of the time. Okay, 1200s. About the middle of the 12th century, the name Frankfurt first appears in a Jewish source, from which we learn that there was a small number of Jews there. They were so well off that neither alms nor a charitable organization was needed. I'm sorry, what? What'd you say? In the 1200s in Germany, the Jews were so well off that neither alms nor a charitable organization was needed because they were the chief wholesalers? Oh, so they were running things. Wow. Let's see. Christian sources first mention a permanent settlement of Jews in Frankfurt about the end of the 12th century. By the beginning of the 13th century, the Frankfurt community made quite a respectable showing. Thus, at the time, one of the most eminent Jewish savants of the Middle Ages, Rabbi Simon Hadarshan, the preacher, sojourned among them. I'm not going to pronounce everything correctly. Maybe you can help. He was the compiler of the Yalkut, a collection of the Haggadic interpretations of the Holy Writ found in the Talmud and in the Midrashim. It's just so ridiculous to pretend like I'm reading about Jews when they're sitting here talking about how, he had interpreted the scripture. If the Lord is with you and you are indeed a Jew, there is no interpretation warranted because you have the understanding of the meaning. You don't have to make any effort of your own. If Hebrew is your language and you understand Hebraic cipher, then you need not interpret. You know. But they're liars and hypocrites. In 1241, the Jews of Frankfurt first appear plainly in the light of history in a way only too typical of their thorny future. You know, in Hebrew, there is a sign. The Hebrew doesn't really have letters, they have signs. The sign is called sin, and it is the picture of a thorn. They appear plainly in the light of history in a way only too typical of their thorny future. Thorny indeed. In that year occurred the first massacre of the Jews, a pogrom due not at all to economic causes but to superstition, anxiety, and despair. Hold on. Let's cross out superstition real quick. A pogrom due to anxiety and despair. How did the Jews induce anxiety and despair? That's pretty remarkable. So you have a population who is in control of the trade, of trading, so and they were wealthy. They needed no help. How could they have induced anxiety and despair and then superstition? It was the time when the flood of Mongols from Hungary and Poland was pouring itself over Germany, and there was no strong force to stem it. The terrified folk sought a connection between the Jews and the Mongols, whom people frequently regarded as a remnant of the 10 lost tribes, now driven from their abodes as forerunners of the Day of Judgment. A connection. They said that the Jews caused superstition. Maybe they mean suspicion. So people suspected that the Mongolian horde was brought on by these so-called Jews. They even accused here it says it. I'll stop my commentary. They even accused the Jews of secretly helping the Mongols with weapons and supplies. Contemporaries found proof of their suspicion in the prevalence of the Jews of an obvious spirit of joy. The latter, in fact, at that time expected a complete subversion of the existing order with the speedy coming of the Messiah, as is evidenced in the works of Jewish writers of that day. The onrushing Mongols might be his heralds. And upon what were these hopes based? Upon a chronological play on numbers. As Christendom had feared the end of the world in the year 1000, so did the 5,000 according to the Jewish reckoning of time, corresponding approximately to the year 1240, raise expectations of something extraordinary. And indeed, something extraordinary did occur. Open warfare against the Jews on the most trivial of occasions, in Frankfurt on May 29th, 1241, there was a bloody conflict. The primary cause of this is not indubitably fixed. It appears that the fight turned about a Jew who wanted to receive baptism, while his family tried to hinder him. The exchange of words turned into acts which developed into a 2-day battle. The doors of the Jews' houses were knocked in with axes, and the inmates met death in many forms. Some were stabbed or shot with arrows, and others were stoned or drowned. Many set their houses afire themselves. Hear this. Many set their houses afire themselves, and were consumed along with them. All who did not accept baptism were straightway murdered. At that time, the community numbered 200 souls. There's never one soul among the so-called Jew. Some foreign Jews, too, including a few French students, met their death in this massacre. After the bloody carouse of the terrible May days had evaporated and quiet and self-possession had been restored to their disturbed spirits, the people of Frankfurt may well have felt anxiety as to the punishment which the Emperor Frederick II, the Hohenstaufen, would visit on the city. The Hohenstaufen emperors had hitherto always avenged open crimes against the Jews. Oh, friends. But Frederick was lingering in Italy. His weak representative in Germany, Conrad, let the matter rest. Not a hair of any Frankfurt citizen was touched, a policy certainly not calculated to scare people off from massacres of Jews. In spite of the frightful end of the first community, only a few years later, Jews were again settling in the city. That's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? You hear that, Eden? There was a massacre. They massacred these people, and so they stuck around and kept it their homes. It was nice and safe. Isn't that cool? It's amazing how they managed to stay safe throughout all these massacres.
It's almost like they had a plan. They really wanted that area for some reason.
Yeah, they really did want it, didn't they? They would kill for it. Perhaps they would kill and they would die for it. Perhaps what attracted them was the ever-increasing success of the fairs, with the possibility they provided of making much money at all kinds of trade. Well, there you go. Maybe. For about 100 years, they lived completely undisturbed, in tolerable relations with the other citizens of the city on the Main, the council protecting them as far as possible. This was indeed necessary, for along the Rhine, religious fanaticism perpetrated veritable orgies. Let's say that again. This was indeed necessary, for along the Rhine, religious fanaticism perpetrated veritable orgies. Although Pope Innocent IV had issued a bull in July 1247 in which he condemned as a wicked invention the accusation that Jews partook of the heart of a Christian boy at Passover, nevertheless, the blood accusations would not down. Murder and robbery were their consequences. So, Christians accused the Jews of murder and robbery, and as a consequence of the accusation, they would be murdered and robbed. Well, no, the accusation was of the blood libel, they call it. Libel, is that how you say it? Hey, I'm sorry, Goy. We have not eaten the heart of any Christian children. Now, for saying that, we're going to murder and rob you. Let me read that one more time. When the Pope condemned as a wicked invention the accusation that Jews partook in the heart of a Christian boy at Passover, nevertheless, the blood accusations would not down. Murder and robbery were their consequences. The council, however, succeeded in suppressing these superstitions in Frankfurt. We may indeed infer that the Frankfurt Jews felt tolerably secure because none of them were among the large number, particularly from the Rhine, who tired of
Okay, thank you for tolerating my cat while she's in heat. I'm looking for the spot where we were. We may indeed infer that the Frankfurt Jews felt tolerably secure because none of them were among the large number, particularly from the Rhineland, who, tired of perpetual persecutions, were leaving house and home in Germany to seek Palestine. In fact, I'm sorry, what, in the 12th century? What are they doing if they could just be if they wanted to be in Palestine and they had the freedom to just be there? They were just in Germany as wholesale traders, I guess. They were just in there owning things. And they went back when they got tired of putting up with the people resisting their rule. That's what it sounds like, at least. In fact, they had not yet taken that position as pariahs in the life of the community, which was theirs later in the Middle Ages. Wow, because this is before people, I guess, discovered the truth. Before Christ was born, that is. In fact, they had not yet taken that position as pariahs. Okay. I don't know what you're thinking. Julian, if this is the 1100s, which is the 12th century, then Christ had been born for 1100 years. I don't know. I'm suspicious about 1,000 of the years of our calendar, to be honest with you. But I really don't know. It would make a lot of sense if they corrupted the calendar by 1,000 years so that we would be misplaced in time and we could not recognize that the scripture is about what's happening to us at this very point. And I know people have been talking about that a lot. But yeah, you really can't judge where we are in history by a calendar. I think you can only do it by the Bible, because you recognize the events in the world as something at some point in the Bible. Like the Bible itself is a calendar. Except, well, there is an end. There is an end of the calendar. So y'all go read your calendars. I guess that's all I have to say. Let me get back to this. Let's see. In fact, they had not yet taken that position as pariahs in the life of the community, which was theirs later in the Middle Ages. This showed itself even when a Jew sought admission to the city. He was treated just as Christians were. First, he had to pay a citizen's tax of 3 pounds of hellers, and then within a month he had to acquire a rental of the value of 1/2 mark yearly on some house or piece of ground. With these payments, he had bought the right of citizenship, and his name, like those of the Christian inhabitants, were entered on the city register. Indeed, on the same pages. Moreover, it was not forbidden Jews to acquire land. They owned houses as well as fields and vineyards, which, however, they seldom cultivated themselves. Well, they did well. And that's the thing about money. Money really removes you from God. When you have money, you could just buy everything. But when you're poor and you have the Spirit of God, you can just make everything. You're poor as in you don't have money, but you have the understanding given you by God to make anything that you want, that you need. Right? God's power is to create, and that's the power that he gives us. That's why you can't worship God and mammon, because whenever you rely on money, then you just buy everything. That's not to say that there aren't people who have money that don't create. There are, but let's keep reading. Nevertheless, it would be a mistake to believe that the Jews at that time occupied German soil as freemen. Oh, they were slaves, just like the Germans. Is that what you're saying? That's what it means to be on the city register, is that you were entered into the yoke of the government. They stood rather in the relation of serfs of the chamber to the reigning emperor. You see, now that makes a lot of sense. See, so they weren't even normal citizens. They were direct serfs of the emperor. So there is a particular relationship there between the Jews and the emperor, which is not shared with the rest of the Germans. So what is a freeman? Okay, so the freeman, what distinguishes a free man from an imperial serf? I think of an imperial serf as like a fed, what we call a fed today, like a federal agent. So the Jews were feds. There were the freemen, and then there was the empire, the emperor, and then there was his feds that lived among the freemen, that informed the government of the ongoings. Okay, let me tell you what's up right now. So the algorithm is this way, and you're getting recommended stuff that you don't understand. It's suspicious, and people have called me a fed just because I'm able to talk, to read you this book by the Jewish Publication Society of America in Philadelphia. But so you might know that this is a Jubilee year. And What that means is that for a year the land is allowed to lie fallow, which means unseeded. So the land, the fields have been plowed, and before they are seeded again, they will lie unseeded for a year. Now, if you are familiar with Genesis 1, you know that we are the land. We are the earth. Adam means earth, right? It means man. The body dies, it returns to earth. We are earth. We are earth. God is spirit. And that's why Jesus Christ is man and God. He's earth and he's spirit. Just like us, whenever we choose him, when we choose the truth. But so the reason that you're being recommended what you are is the algorithm feeds you what it knows you're interested in. But the reason that these things that you're interested in are allowed to be openly discussed is during the fallow year, the Jubilee year, they let the plants grow wild. They let grow what will grow. And come what will of it. And I imagine, I don't know all about this. All I did was read an article on JewishEncyclopedia.com. I'll be reading that to y'all soon. I imagine that before it's seeded again, the field will have to be culled, the weeds culled out of it. And so, by the way, look up the etymology of the name Fauci, and it means scythe. Let's get back to this. Focus. Let's see. All right, so as federal agents of the Imperial Chamber, they were not allowed to leave the empire without permission of the overlord. They were bound to German soil. The legal relationship was established gradually. Under Rudolf I, it was completely developed. His successors interpreted the serfdom more strictly. Under Louis the Bavarian, the Jews appeared virtually without rights. I wonder why. Can we pronounce Bavaria differently? V can be pronounced as B, and vice versa. Vabadian. The R could be pronounced as a D. A could be pronounced as a Y or an O. Pretty much the vowels are interchangeable. I think this is the Latin alphabet, and that's based off of a wall. So it makes a W sound. In Latin, actually, I know I'm so sidetracked. In Latin, in classical Latin, V is pronounced as a W, you see. But in ecclesiastical Latin, V is pronounced as a V. Because in Aramaic, they changed the sound of wa to a V. And pretty much Latin is a corruption of Greek in the same way that Aramaic is a corruption of Hebrew. And, I haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about this. I'm kind of doing this in real time. But Latin seems to be interlinked with Aramaic. Acts of violence against them he extenuated according to the principle. I think extenuate means to lessen it, to soften it, to excuse it even, to permit it. There you go. You ever hear the words extenuating circumstances? Acts of violence against them he permitted according to the principle, you belong to us, body and goods. Now, here's an interesting thing, too. Since rabbinic types aren't Jews and that everyone else is a Jew, people who are Christians, people who have thought and who practice self-denial and love for one another. So, who are they talking about here? Are they talking about us or them? It's just an interesting question to consider whenever you read certain things. We may act toward you, do to you, and treat you as we will and as seems well to us. So maybe that's why we have the relationship with them that we do today, because this has always been the relationship, that they were the federal agents for the government, and we're just the slaves. There's the concept of the court Jew. Wow, this just makes so much sense. So that distinction has never gone away, right? With the words we use change, our perspective change, the culture changes. Culture is fake. Culture is designed to make us think that things are changing, but everything stays the same. Like literally, the scripture is about right now. The Jews then had become nothing more than an imperial prerogative, like mines, tolls, and indeed a very profitable one. Wow, just the way the way this author talks. So you see, he's honest, but he frames it in such a way that it could be very easily misunderstood. You've heard of saying the quiet part out loud. They say the quiet part quietly. This is it. They're just being careful, talking openly, phrasing things very carefully. Just like criminals. Like, think about people who are selling drugs in the hood or guns or whatever, and they got their words, their slang. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? You heard me? The Jews then had become, a police constituent with this attitude was pursued toward them. Since the German emperors, so if that was their relationship with the German emperors, who were the German emperors? You know, people have a habit of loving royalty and identifying with it. But the whole point is that they're ruling over us. Why do you identify with royalty? Oh, well, actually, I have a castle, and this is my family crest. And look, don't be proud about the evil of your ancestors. Do you personally, can you go to the castle? Do you have a trust fund? No, you're an orphan. You're an orphan. All right, these royal people went around screwing everybody and created a bunch of orphans, and that's us. That's all of us. That's why they hate us. They hate us because we're orphans, just like it's like a Bill Burr and Billy Corgan. You know what I'm talking about? Look that up if you don't. I Hypocrite covered it really well. With them, they infofed. I'm sorry, y'all help me with this one. Infoft. What? What the confefe is that? Look, that does say, if you put a C right here, confefe. Confefade. Does this say, do y'all agree, could this be confefe? With them, they confefade old followers to prove themselves grateful, or they tried to win new ones. They pledged them and redeemed them, which last they once forgot, and so produced hopeless confusion and endless quarrels. On their part, when those and fofid, I mean, really, I see the word foe, in inside, foe, fed, infofid. What? On their part, when these infofid were in need. Whoa. And when the infofid were in need of, when the confefade were in need of money, they pledged the income from the Jews further so that the most remarkable transactions resulted. Dude, confefe, it was by no means displeasing to see the Jews grow rich, to see them sucking themselves full like sponges. There was all the more to squeeze out of them. I see you, Donald Trump. The imperial tax on the Jews was imposed not on individuals, but on the community as a whole. We do not know whether the total sum which was divided among the individual taxpayers was fixed solely by the imperial treasury or was determined after previous consultation with the Jews. The latter is more nearly in accord with medieval usage. The tax rose or fell with the growth or diminution of the community. If the Jews of Frankfurt had to pay at the same rate as those of Friedberg, of whom we have exact information, the tax rate was only about 2% of their property. Who pays taxes with property? Therefore, the enormous increase of the imperial tax of the Jews of Frankfurt at the end of the 13th century may be taken as proof that the well-being of the community was well as its numbers had increased considerably. Now I think of like Bernie Sanders. I mean, these people are all the same. Like, they do well at making you think that they are competing for your well-being, but they're working together for your enslavement. The sources of those days mention not only the imperial tax, but also the Jewish tithe, which gave rise to many a dispute. However, this term does not imply an extra tax, but just the 10th part of the imperial tax, on which, when the emperor was abroad, the Archbishop of Mainz, as protector of the Jews, had a claim. Not that this tax had always been paid to the archbishopric unhesitatingly. The emperor had very often tried to turn it over to others to realize a profit from it in some way or other. But during the last 30 years before the second massacre of the Jews, the Archbishopric of Mainz had been regularly receiving its tax of 840 pounds of hellers from the Jewish community of Frankfurt. Very nice. That's a very good profit. Besides the tribute of the emperor and the empire, Frankfurt Jewry had also to pay taxes to the city and the community. Oh, look at that. They're just normal citizens. In itself, not one of these taxes was unreasonably high, though altogether they may have been burdensome enough. But there must have been, in addition to these obligations, others unknown to us, or else severe property losses. For at the beginning of the 14th century, we find the Frankfurt community in such serious financial straits that it negotiated a rather large loan from the Frankfurt bureaus. Oh, wow. I wonder how much they probably had to pay 4% of their property in taxes. That's terrible. Various pieces of real estate belonging to the community served as security. Manifestly, well-being in hard times alternated rapidly with the Jews of Frankfurt. A further Jewish tax was introduced by Louis the Bavarian toward the end of his reign, the Golden Ofenpfiffigen. The Goldner Opferpfennig. P and F are the same letter, by the way. Opferpfennig. They both come from the Hebrew letter pay. This tribute was not a collective tax like the one mentioned above, but a poll tax. You see, there's a difference, Goy. Every Jew and every Jewess that had passed the 12th year of age, what? and had means amounting to 20 gulden had to pay 1 gulden yearly. Whoa. Whoa, dude, from 12? That's almost as bad as teaching your child to believe in Santa Claus. Thus, Louis found ways and means of renewing the imperial serfdom of the Jews, which, through loans to princes and imperial cities, had become largely illusory and created new sources of income for the imperial exchequer, which could, let's see, we'll turn the page here. He could in turn be loaned and pledged. Well, that's just fantastic. That's a fantastic idea. Her name is Sybil. Do y'all know what that means? In spite of the new burden that Louis imposed on the Jews of the empire, including those of Frankfurt, he cannot be called any enemy of the Jews. Certainly, he regarded himself as their protector. Less, it is true, for humanitarian than for financial reasons. So, what I'm getting from this is those who say they're Jews and who are not, but do lie, who are the synagogue of Satan. It's Revelations 3:9. They're the dwarves, right? Obviously, those are the dwarves. Those are the dwarves. They're dwarves. They're the dwarves. You might say, Julian, that's very anti-Semitic. We're actually goblins. And I don't know. I know that gobbledygook is a good, accurate description of everything that I've read thus far. But hey, I love goblins and dwarves. My D&D character, Clobdius, he was the Clob Lord, and he was a god. Clob Lord 504 is my former alias. He was the Clob Lord, and he could turn into a clob at will whenever he wanted, and even to be wielded by others. And he took the form of a deer, and he broke his bones to stand upright like a man. But he could not be killed, you see, because that was a deer. He was the spirit inside of the deer. And whenever he would be killed, he would assume the form of whatever the nearest thing is that could receive a spirit. Let's see. It is, at all events, a striking circumstance. Is that where I am? In general, he was a friend. All right, let's see. All right, Louis, we're talking about Louis here. In spite of the new burden that Louis imposed on the Jews of the empire, including those of Frankfurt, he cannot be called an enemy of them. He regarded himself as their protector, less, it is true, for humanitarian than for financial reasons. In general, he was a friend of the cities and fostered their growth, and he had a special preference for Frankfurt. This favorable attitude toward the city he extended to the Jews within its walls, who stood nearer to him than the other Jews of the empire, even than those in his hereditary domains. It is, I wonder why is that? What is that? What's up with that relationship? They were nearer to him than even the Jews in his hereditary domains. It is, at all events, a striking circumstance that in the distinguished list of Jewish communities which Louis, in the course of his long reign, pledged or bought, among them the communities of Regensburg, Strasbourg, Speyer, and Worms, Wurzburg, Rothenburg, etc., the name of Frankfurt is not found. He conferred effective protection upon the Frankfurt Jews in the years 1336 and 1337. All right. I'll read to you more later. See ya. Let me reorient myself so I can get better lighting for you people. The Judengas. They all have very nice hats. From the Getman manuscript. Girl. You sweet thing. Ew, what's that? Is that a flea? Gross. Excuse me, Sybil. Thank you, Mrs. Thank you, ma'am.